is Fox 8 News at 10 o'clock. Up to date, not up late.
Good evening. I'm Courtney Simonselli coming to you from Fox News. With the 73rd anniversary of the implementation of internment camps coming up, tonight we'll be having a special featuring a guest. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese paranoia increased dramatically in the U.S. There was a large population of Japanese Americans, which caused fear that the Japanese Americans would be a security risk if the Japanese attacked the mainland. In response to this exaggerated fear of the realistically loyal Japanese Americans, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, ordering the relocation of all people of Japanese ancestry to concentration camps in the interior of America. Orders were posted in Japanese communities instructing anyone with even slight Japanese blood on how to comply with the order. Even U.S. citizens who had never visited Japan and Japanese veterans who had fought in World War I for the U.S. had to relocate. Families had to sell their homes and businesses and give up most possessions. In total, about 120,000 people were located from the West into one of 10 camps in the Midwest. Life in the camps was far from pleasant, with families shoved into makeshift barracks and given barely enough means to survive the harsh winters. The last camp was not closed until 1946. With next month marking the 73rd anniversary of Executive Order 9066, News Channel 8 invited critically acclaimed historian Sinead McKenna to tell us more. Hi, Sinead.
Hi, Courtney.
Welcome to Fox News.
Thanks for having me.
So you're here to talk to us about Japanese internment camps, and I hear you just recently wrote a book about the topic.
In fact, I do, Courtney. My new book, Life of Manzanar, will be available in your local Barnes & Noble next month. Grab a copy.
I'll be sure to grab a copy. Back to the topic of the evening. Can you tell us a little bit about what powers President Roosevelt exercised during this?
Although executive orders are not a formal power stated in the Constitution, presidents have been issuing them since the start of the nation. With the issuing of Executive Order 9066, President Roosevelt took advantage of the state of terror that the nation was in to command the removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Executive Order 9066 allowed military commanders to designate military areas where any person of Japanese ancestry would be forced to relocate after abandoning their lives on the West Coast. Whereas the executive order was the means by which President Roosevelt enforced his power, he also accessed his power as the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy in authorizing the Secretary of War to designate military areas. President Roosevelt also utilized his power as Commander-in-Chief to authorize the use of federal troops and other federal agencies in the actual relocation of the Japanese.
It sounds like President Roosevelt took extreme action due to the chaos that the nation was in. In your opinion, was this an abuse of power?
FDR's issuing of an executive order was indeed within his power, as was his using his position as Commander-in-Chief. It was the details and the actual rollout of the order, however, that made the order an example of an abuse of power. Under the Constitution, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any persons of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. This is the main segment of the Constitution that has been stated as evidence regarding the constitutionality of the Japanese internment. While the nation was in the midst of a crisis and the president had the support of the majority of the people, Executive Order 9066 was indeed an abuse of power because the camp stripped the Japanese Americans of their most basic civil rights.
Makes sense. So how do you think Executive Order 9066 affected the presidents and policies following this event?
Before the end of the war, the Japanese Americans were allowed to return home to the West Coast in 1946, putting an end to the internment of Japanese American citizens. Executive Order 9066 had significant impacts on future policies and administrations. After years of Japanese requests for compensation, Ronald Reagan signed a bill providing the restitution for wartime internment of Japanese American civilians, the Civil Rights Act, in 1988. Just in Reagan's opening statement, it is clear that he himself recognized the Japanese internment as an abuse of power, saying, "We gather here today to right a grave wrong." This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 people were of Japanese descent. As a slight repayment for the trauma that the Japanese suffered, the Redress Act granted each surviving internee about $20,000 in compensation and a formal presidential apology. Clearly, this payment could never fully repay the Japanese, but at the very least, it represented that the U.S. government recognized their wrongdoing. Aside from immediate impacts, there have also been long-term impacts, as was seen in the following days of the attack on the World Trade Centers on 9/11. Although President Bush did not authorize military areas for those of Muslim descent, he did sign into law the Patriot Act, which purpose, much like Executive Order 9066, is to strengthen domestic security and broaden the powers of law enforcement agencies with regards to identifying and stopping terrorists. It is obvious that Executive Order 9066 was examined when creating the Patriot Act, and that there are similarities between the two.
It's interesting to see how the U.S. has responded to different crises. Do you think the growth of presidential power was more of a positive or negative in this case?
As was stated by President Reagan, Executive Order 9066 was a grave wrong that stripped Japanese Americans of their rights and liberties granted to them under the Constitution. Because of the nature of the executive order, the growth of presidential power exercised by President Roosevelt was a negative. This order set the precedent for future presidents and politicians to act impulsively due to public pressure following a crisis or during a time of war. The internment camps were devastating to the Japanese Americans and mark a major flaw in U.S. history.
It's been great talking to you, Sinead. You've given us some really valuable insight into an event that's often overlooked. Alright, that's it for tonight. Tune in tomorrow for some more hard-hitting stories. On behalf of the Fox News team, thanks for watching. Have a great night.